We are recording.
Yay! All right, so welcome everybody to yet another Nova Scribes. How y'all doing? We're dialing in from the roof of the Department of Labor. Nancy, scoot over towards me a little bit so they can see that. Yeah, there we go. Amazing. So Nancy and I were facilitating together today. Our facilitation went a little late, and rather than trying to do this from the metro, we decided we do it from up here. That is not a virtual background. But let's go ahead and jump into it. Very, very excited to have with us Dana Wright-Wasson. She's the inventor of so many cool things, including this, which she's going to talk to us a little bit about. So Dana, tell us about Meeting in a Box.
All right, I'll tell you about Meeting in a Box. So a little bit about me and my background just flows into Meeting in a Box. I come out of a background of doing training, corporate training, and organization development. I've been doing graphic facilitation since 1994 when I first saw Joan McIntosh, who worked at the Grove at the time, come to what was known at the time as ASTD, because I remember last Nova Scribes, we were trying to figure out what that's called now. And I was so mesmerized, and I said, I've got to learn how to do this. So I explored the Grove, took every class they had. This is back when David was teaching it. And so fast forward, I just fell in love with graphic facilitation, have been doing it a very long time. My joke is often, for as long as I've been doing it, I think I should be better at it. And so Meeting in a Box came out of basically just frustration that people always are complaining how bad meetings are. And for those of us who are in the meeting space, it's like it just doesn't have to be that bad. And Brian, you know this because you wrote your own book about virtual meetings, which I love. But it really doesn't have to be a waste of time at all if it's structured properly and it's thought out a little bit. And so one day I got really frustrated after a really poorly designed meeting that I did not have anything to do with the design of. And so on the airplane home, I wrote my outline for my first book. Fast forward a year, I ran a book writing retreat and wrote a second book, which is actually included in the kit. And, you know, my third book was about engagement, employee engagement. And I thought, oh my gosh, now I've made kind of a brand for myself about meetings. And I don't know if I want to become the meetings girl. And I thought, how do I tie these together? And it really occurred to me, like just kind of in a Shazam moment, that meetings are a steady way that people have in organizations to engage people. So we can't avoid meetings. Leaders often hold meetings. How can leaders engage their teams? They can hold better meetings. So that seemed like that perfectly fit together, and everything made sense for me in terms of why I made the box. So then I just, and I'm probably answering your question in a very long sort of way, Brian. So then that was after I wrote those first two books, but before the third. And I just thought, well, how could I pull together all the tools and knowledge of things I've seen, I've done, I know about, pull it all together so that people who don't necessarily facilitate for a living could run better meetings. And so I gathered, I designed a lot of templates because I'd really found that templates help people to kind of get focused. And I also spent, I don't even know how long, gathering these business models of things that I thought would be useful in business settings to get people focused. And the Visual Explorer, and I'll go through the kit in more detail, but the Visual Explorer-like cards, when I first saw those, and I have a beta set of those cards, I thought I could do something like this. I could make better pictures. And so I spent about, without joking, I think I spent 10 years, gathering pictures. And I could tell you about every single one of those pictures in that 200 card deck because every one of them was taken personally by me.
Well, sorry, Nancy and I are geeking out with your stuff right now. And we were saying we could have used this today. I was able to get a little bit of it in. So so as I was going through the Meeting in the Box, the thing that it's amazing. The Visual Explorer, riff on Visual Explorer that you've got, the book that you've got. I got to tell you though, as kind of a model guy, the thing that I really went nuts over was these. So you've got like 27 models in here. And you've got everything from like the ladder of inference, you've got the Johari window, you've got Edward de Bono's 6 hats, you've got the Tuckman, the forming, storming, norming, performing. I mean, these are the ones that like, I was so excited to see all these in one place. So how did you decide to put them on cards rather than in another book? Tell me about the cards.
So, this came out of the Grove has or had a set of cards that they used to sell that were about that size and had all of their visual templates. And from the first set of those cards that I got, I found that if I was working with a client, whether it was on the phone and I was looking at them, or even better, if I was face to face with them, if we could play kind of a card shuffle to talk about the design of the meeting in kind of a miniature form, it helped them see what the process was going to look like and got their buy-on and their buy-in and their understanding a lot sooner. And so that's really where that came from, Brian. It was really like, what are all the models that I've ever heard of, that I've ever used, that I've ever seen, that I think people either facilitating for a living or facilitating kind of on the side or impromptu could use. And so you were telling a story before the call started about pulling out one of the models today and finding it useful just in the moment. And I think that's great. I love the idea of using it for prep. I love even better the idea that you pulled out a model in the card deck that you had as a resource, quickly sketched it up and used it in a group process. I mean, that's exactly how I'd love the kit to be used.
Yeah, what I love about these models is that they each of them serves as like a lens to understand something that's really messy and ambiguous and uncertain, which is human nature, human behavior, right? And so if you've got a model that you can sketch up, throw on a flip chart, or as you said, incorporate into your agenda, it can create just some safety in the room to say, hey, this weird dynamic that we're feeling, there's somebody else has thought of this, somebody else has experienced this. There's something that actually explains this. So how do you? I mean, can you take us through meeting in a box, kind of piece by piece?
Absolutely. And I'll just quickly, because Brian, you're just about like nearly pitch dark over there with the sun going down. This is the kind of model that he's talking about. So these cards are 4x6. So they fit nicely in the box that he's talking about, which I'll show you in a second. But you can see like that model. It's always slow when you do this, but you can see like this is, that's, okay, I'm terrible at this. This is phases of change, for example. And so it gives you all of the components of that model. And all of these, this was a real dilemma that I had to research, but I attribute everyone, everywhere I got these models from. And some of them, for example, I didn't know. So there's Cultural Iceberg. So many of you may have used or seen that one. The 9-box appraisal model actually came from McKinsey back in the 1960s, believe it or not. And so it's really helpful to see not only the model itself, but where it came from. And that was, thank God for the internet, because that was quite a little search process to figure out where these things come from. So when you open the box is, I have to tell you about the box and the creation of this box, right? So here's the box. It looks like this. A friend of mine, actually in Virginia, talked about, you really need to have a cool factor, right? You need to have something that looks really cool. Like when you walk into a room, they know you have got this figured out. So we researched, and I love this cool little box because it's got a little handle on it. It locks on the front. So like it's some sort of James Bond sort of thing where, you come in, you use your little key lock and open it up. And what's in the box is actually, I put together what I call a quick guide. And so for those of you who are visual, I have one side that looks like this. So it's a very visual, like this is how you use, this is the roadmap for how you use this. So first you define the objectives, then you match the objectives to visuals, then you explore and design the actual content. But the other side is very linear for people who need a little bit more explanation. And so talks about literally the same information as the other side, but you can actually compare what it's like to have it be visual versus being linear. And then in the book, sorry, in the box also is the To Meet or Not to Meet. So that was the second book that I created that just gives you some tips for how to put together some good meetings. And then the templates that Brian hadn't talked about, these are some templates that are actually in the kit that you can use. I have two sizes because there's a thumb drive in the box that you can actually take this to a printer or send it to a printer, or you can upload it. So if you want to, if you're doing virtual meetings, you can put it into a Zoom, you can put it into a mural, whatever. But there's most of the templates are flip chart size. So there's 15 that are flip chart size, and then there's 8 that are wall size. So if you're printing them out, for those of you who work on walls, you know, it's a 4 foot by 8 foot or however you want to scale it. But the wall charts are things like, let's see, there's an agenda that you can use to plan out a meeting or put that in front of people. There's a project card that has project stuff, updates from meetings, and you can show where the progress is. So there's a number of things that are useful in here. And then the flip chart sized, which is the bulk of these, are things like an action planning template, a RACI model, urgent versus important. And so just getting groups to work with those types of things. And then as Brian was talking about, there's 27 models in here in this deck that have all, you know, a number of models. Again, you can use this for planning purposes or in the meeting. And then finally, those visual cards that have all sorts of pictures on them. And then they have quotes on the reverse side. So they can be used in 2 ways. So you can spread them out and have people, you know, give people a prompting question and have them pick a card, or you can have them at the beginning of the meeting, hand out quotes and just see how that quote relates to the meeting or their day or however you want to use it. I have people who love using those decks of cards just to pull a quote for the day. So they're quotes like, what the mind of man can conceive and believe it can achieve. Don't count the days, make the days count. So, you know, lots of just kind of those types of thinking quotes. Has Brian gone completely dark on us?
No, it's a little dark, but I can still hear you. Dana, I was going to ask you for the pictures. Did you shoot all of those yourself?
I did. I shot all of those over the course of 10 years. I saw the visual cards when they came out. I have a beta set, and I said I could do this, but I could make the pictures much more personal. So they're I can literally tell you what each of those pictures are from the times that I took them, including some pictures of my kids. I'm not sure they know are in decks of cards that are circulated around the world.
Do you have some favorite prompts that you like to use with it?
Yeah, I do. I love using them in a visioning session. So I ask people 2 questions. I have them, they get to do a 2-card pick. So one is, how do you, you know, so this is after a conversation, for example, we talk about, how do you see our organization today? So they pick a card for that. And then they do a second sort and say, how would you like to see the organization in the future? And when they pick the card, for those of you who've never used Visual Explorer, it's a really amazing and incredible activity because people tend to, I'm sorry, I'm not following chat. I apologize. What people do is they tend to move from their rational left brain to their creative right brain. And I've seen it happen time and time again. And so they stop being rational about how they describe things or how they're experiencing things, and they kind of go to this kind of inner intuitive self. And I think it almost catches them off guard sometimes. So my most memorable story was I was doing an engagement session years ago in a manufacturing plant. And we had gathered a group of 20 people from the plant floor. And there was this one guy. He was a big burly guy. I'm sure he was a teddy bear at home, but he was very intimidating looking. And he was kind of angry about what was going on in his workplace, right? And we did this activity, and he said he picked a picture of a flower coming out of a rock. And his description about what that meant to him in terms of how he saw the future like, I still remember it to this day, and it was probably 15 years ago. It was really moving, but it really, imagining this guy talking like that in a normal setting is probably unfathomable, but somehow the setting plus the photo just gave him the words and the freedom to be able to do that. And it was really, I think it was even a shift for him in his mindset of how he was approaching work, and how he was going to be a problem solver instead of a problem maker. So it was amazing.
I think to your point, Dan, I think there's a real interesting dynamic that happens when you lay the cards out in front of people. I mean, this is something we were talking about yesterday with this group that we're working with, that, we like to think that as rational people, what we do is we weigh all of the criteria and then we make a decision. But in fact, our brains don't work that way. What we do is we decide almost subconsciously, and then we look for data that supports what we already believe, right?
Right.
And so it can be really hard to bring a group into a process and say, well, okay, so tell me what your team is going to look like in 10 years. And they're like, they freeze up. They can't do it. But if you lay some cards out and you say, pick a card that represents what you'd like your team to look like in 10 years.
Yes.
Okay. They pick one. And what they've done is that they've moved into advocacy. So it's like, okay, here's the card. This represents us. And then you follow up with questions like, well, why? Tell me, what is it about that card? What is it about that image that describes your team? And now you can back into all of those attributes that are so hard to pull out any other way.
Yes, exactly. Yes, it's kind of like you go to intuitive and then you back out into rational, but staying at the rational level doesn't get them to that creative thinking process. I have the same experience. Yeah.
So just because you're kind of a models geek, and so am I, do you have any favorite models that you just use all the time?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I'm amazed lately what's come up is this 9-box appraisal model. And in fact, I have a client who's actually using it backwards. And so I'm really keeping my hands behind my back to not go, you're doing it wrong. You're doing it wrong. I think a lot is coming up around dialogue and communication. So inquiry versus advocacy comes up a lot these days. So not arguing for your point, but really being a better listener comes up. I mean, honestly, Brian, when I sort through this, it's like I'm visiting old friends. I tell you, like I go through and I'm like, oh yeah, how companies grow. I forgot about that model. And I remember like coming behind Emily Shepard at one point. She had drawn that model and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. Let me see what we can do with that. So the Johari window, I do again and again when I do things, instruments like Myers-Briggs or DISC, that comes up because that's really at the root of what those models are about, is helping people to reveal more about themselves and create some safety in sharing those things. Let's see. Of course, Maslow's an oldie but a goodie, right?
Yeah. I love something that I'd never seen before. I love that you had layered the tell, sell, consult, and trust on top of Tuckman. I love it when people layer models on top of each other. So layering those decision-making styles on top of forming, storming, norming, performing. It's like, oh, of course, that makes sense. There's implicit decision-making models that are, you would have at each one of those stages of team dynamics. Yes. I'd never seen that before. It's like, of course this makes sense. I gotta ask though, I guess I've been misattributing it. I always thought that tell, sell, consult, and trust, I thought that was Peter Senge from the Fifth Discipline. Was that came from the situational leadership?
In my research, it did. I have no idea. I mean,
I could be dead wrong.
Yeah, I know. Well, and who came first, right? Like somebody, I was working with yesterday and she said, there are no original models or ideas. They're all recycled. So it's maybe who was last attributed to it. I don't know. The research on this was unbelievable. Like I thought that was going to be really easy, and it was really hard because of exactly what you just said. Like the person it's attributed to is actually not the original person, and so on and so on. So, and I'll tell you, the really interesting part of this process, the learning curve for me that year, and this was a year, by the way, that my father died. My mother was not doing well. I had just moved. I just launched 2 books the previous 2 years. And so I decided, I guess I was bored and I needed something to do. I'm not sure. But learning how to source printing of this stuff and the making of stuff was pretty darn interesting. I mean, I'm telling you guys, a lot of the stuff was sourced from China. So for example, the box was sourced from China. The flash drive, which I haven't even talked about yet, this little adorable flash drive was sourced from China with a logo in it, in a little crystal logo thing. And I learned about Western Union, like sending things through, like this is actually a thing still, that you can send money through Western Union. You're sending it to companies. You have no idea if they really exist, if you're really going to get something. You had to order massive quantities of things at times. But it was a huge learning curve. I mean, I was at our local Safeway many, many times sending money via Western Union to somewhere in China. And I was sure happy when things arrived on my doorstep.
I'm really glad you brought up the flash drive, because to be honest, so I'm on my way into this job today, and I was reading the book, again, and I noticed that it said, there's this little line that said, and by the way, all these templates are on the flash drive. And I was like, flash drive? There's no flash drive in this box. And I'm digging around. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a flash drive in there. Who knew? So what's on the flash drive?
Yes.
What do people get with that?
Yeah, and let me just go through what's in the box altogether, because I think that's a good question. I've been kind of not doing that right. So you get the box, right? So the box looks like this. It's this acrylic box that I carefully pack so it doesn't break if I ship it. And then when you open it, I mean, I'm telling you, down to you guys, the rubber bands that bind these things are branded. So I had to learn where to source branded rubber bands. That was fun. So in the box is the book, the little book that gives you 10 tips to run meetings. There's that quick guide that I was talking about a little bit ago. There's a plastic wrapped set of models. So there's 27 models, as Brian was talking about going through. So those are wrapped and they have a rubber band on it. And then there's 2 sets of templates. So the flip chart size templates, there's 15 of the flip chart and 8 of the wall chart size templates. And then 200 of these picture this cards. I call them picture this, the rubber bands. I know, isn't that crazy? With quotes on the back. So I really wanted them to be dual purpose. So you can use the quotes if you want, or the pictures, or you can use both together. They're not necessarily lined up to be supportive of each other, but it turns out I get lots of feedback that they are very much aligned, the quote with the photo on the reverse side. So win-win. And then one just like starter packet of stickies. I'm not going to brag about the stickies because I don't think they're that great. And then, as I said, the key with the lock to lock your box so nobody can steal it. And then the flash drive actually has all of those models and all of the templates on it. So, which serves 2 purposes. I created it before Zoom was such a thing, right? And so it was mostly to be able to print the templates, as many as you want for as long as you want. But with things being online, you can actually upload it into a PowerPoint. You can use it in Miro or Mural or whatever, medium you want to, because then you can write over the template, or you could even upload it into your iPad. If you were doing some sort of visual work where you needed to write into a template, you could have that be a layer, just like you would have a photo, and then be able to write in it and use it over and over again. Yeah, the rubber bands was kind of like over the top. When you have to suddenly source rubber bands, you're thinking, oh my gosh. Learning curves galore. I was not only learning about models, but I was learning about rubber bands.
Yeah, and you got branded rubber bands, right?
Oh my gosh, I have so many rubber bands, I'm telling you.
So I wanted to ask you about one of these templates in particular, okay? It's the, let me see if I can describe it. The how are we showing up one. Okay?
Yes.
And what I wanted to, because I've actually never seen something like this one before, and I could see this one as being potentially risky with the group. Could you talk through that template and how to use it?
Yeah, so that is particularly for a team. And I want to just point out on I'm going to go back to the screen share because it's easier to see these cards than Brian showing them in the dark, for those of you who have really great vision. So down at the bottom of these cards, you'll see on the green ones, the darker green are the wall chart sized, and the lighter green are the flip chart size. You'll see at the bottom of each card. So for the For the wall chart size, I use uppercase letters. So you'll see B, and that corresponds to what you'll find on the flash drive. But on the lighter lime colored green, you'll see lowercase letters. So for flip chart, remember flip charts are smaller, so it's lowercase letters. So Brian, if I were asking you to nav me to the card you're talking about, what letter is it?
Right, so that would be E as in eggplant.
In lowercase?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'm gonna just pull it up so everybody's able to look at it. Of course, I went backwards. So this is a template. Let me see if I can get it a little closer there. So this is a template that I tend to use with teams, with intact teams who are trying to work. Hello, come on. I love the delay on this Pivo camera. So this is working with a team, particularly over time. It looks blurry, at least on my screen. I swear it's not blurry in real life. Let me see if I can get the exposure a little better. Well, it's lighter, but not less blurry. Let's see. There we go. So this I use with teams to have them do their own sort of weather report, self-assessment of how we're showing up in terms of, for example, putting the right issues out on this card, and then how well are we taking feedback from each other? You could actually change those questions, but those are two sort of good starter questions on both process and content. So are we putting the right issues out there as kind of a content question? And so they can rate each other. They can rate, you know, in a group setting, or they could use dots to go up and say, I think we're like kind of at a 1. We're not doing as great as we should be. Or no, 5. I think we're really, really doing much better than I thought we would. And then at the bottom, it's more of a process thing. So how well are we taking feedback? And then gathering a team score at the end. So you put it at the end and say, okay, our average score for those who love math, you know, to be able to put down a 4. Okay, we're doing pretty well. What could, and then that ensues to a conversation about how could we get better? How could we be better about tackling the right issues? I mean, again, this is a meeting kit. So like, how can we improve our ability to meet effectively? Does that answer that question, Brian?
Yeah, thanks, Dana. I appreciate it. I'm noticing there's a few people dropping some stuff into chat. Looks like you covered most of the questions. Why don't we open it up a little bit? I'm wondering what other people want to ask. And by the way, let me just get back to it before I open it up a little bit longer. Bells are starting to ring here. Let me just say, if you're into models at all, just the models pack I think is worth it. I'm really, really excited about this, and I can't wait to incorporate. There's a lot of these that, you know, I can't wait to incorporate into my practice. But you know, and then beyond that, everything else that's in this is just it's a tremendous value. And Nancy and I were talking, you know, you were saying that you wanted to see this in.
Well, I could see organizations that would really find this powerful, that there are organizations that have their own training and organizational development piece where they are called on to do lots of things. I mean, this is a pretty amazing tool.
Yeah, I'd like to see these just like show up in conference rooms and saying, okay, this is the way that we meet together.
Right.
But yeah, let's open it up. So what questions, comments do people have that are out there?
Or what do you want me to show you more of, or more detail of?
I'll go. Hi, I'm Lee. I love the idea. Can you, like, you're speaking to like sort of a different audience, right? Like this is not a bunch of newbie folks, but if you were like, you know, Mary in marketing who's never, you know, done anything like this, presumably that fold out sort of explains everything. But when Mary opens that thing up, what is it that gets her from like, I don't know, we're having a marketing meeting where we need to come up with a new tagline, and we know the old model, right? The old model is we all sit around a table and we go, who's got a new tagline? And we write that on the whiteboard, and we know that doesn't work.
Right.
So like what happens with Mary in the box, if you can sort of like walk through that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, so a question, how would Mary get the box? Like who's bringing it to her?
I assume some well-meaning person in the organization has dropped it in front of her, and maybe she doesn't know about it, but she's like, I love the idea of running, meetings that are not terrible, and
Yeah.
I'm going to give it a shot, right?
Yeah. I mean, I asked that because it makes a difference, right? Is somebody going to be sitting there with her, kind of helping to explain, or does Mary have to figure it out on her own? So if Mary has to figure
I assume she's figuring it out on her own, because knowing most organizations, there's
Yeah.
no one else who's smarter than Mary in that
Right,
organization.
right. Yeah, no, exactly. I think probably the best way Mary would, using lovely Mary as this example, probably is either doing one of these two things, right? She's either going to say, oh, the book, there's 10 tips for better meetings. Let me see if there's something in there that would help me. And the quick guide could be another way, because this kind of lays out like, you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, and explains what's in the box as part of that process. So I would imagine this would be the best way for Mary to do it. But if Mary's in a hurry, Mary's going to look at this. If Mary has more time, or she's that type of research person, she's probably going to do this. Me, I know this, and this is why I did it the way I did, because this is me. I'm let me figure it out through doing, rather than reading instructions and doing a lot of research. I'm a let me figure it out and fail. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'll ask you a follow-up, and then I'll sort of cede the floor here. But how do I say this? There's sort of like process, there's the models and all that other stuff, right? And then there's sort of like the people side of it, right? You've got 10 people in a room.
Right.
And I wonder how you sort of tackle those two sides, again, thinking about Mary, who's starting at 0, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure how I'd answer that. Brian, do you have any thoughts? Because Brian just got the kit, so I'm really curious how you approached it. I mean,
yeah, I'm thinking about it. So, Lee, let me switch up the question just a little bit to say how we might use it. Okay. So I actually used one of the models with the client to point out to them that what they were doing was actually eroding trust in the room. Okay. And that was that same model of the, and Dana, if you've got it, the tell, sell, consult, entrust model, that one. I don't have the card memorized, but let me tell you the modality that happened. What it was is that they had done a dot vote. They were doing some strategic planning, and they said, okay, we're going to do a dot vote now and pick the top ones. And so people got their dots and they went around and they voted and they said, okay, well, we want this one. And but what happened was the leader who was in the room said, okay, well, I've heard all this and I'm taking this under advisement and I'm going to be the one that ultimately makes the decision. Okay, let's wait for Dana. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so here we go. And Dana, you might slide it down just a little bit.
Yeah.
So you can see it.
Got it?
So
The other direction.
there we go. So there are 4 kinds of meetings. There is a tell, and we need these. By the way, not one of these is better or worse than another. But there's a tell, and the purpose of a tell is to inform or to direct, right? Go do this, or this is how you do CPR, right? Emergencies, assignments, and trainings. Then there's a sell or a persuade. So me as the leader, I've got the idea of what it is that I want to do, but I want you to get on board the bus with me, right? I'm going to try to talk about the benefits of this thing. I'm going to dial into your favorite radio station, WIIFM, what's in it for me, right? I want you to get on board the bus with me. Then there's a consult where, again, I'm the leader. I've got an idea of what I want to do, but I want you to fill in the gaps for me. Give me your advice and feedback, and that's a consult. And then finally, there's an entrust. Some people also call this a co-create, whereas as equals, we're going to come together. We're going to share our ideas. We are going to decide together, and we are going to hold each other accountable for the decisions that come out of this decision-making process. So here's what happened. The leader had snapped the process from an entrust, presumably a dot vote, and then we're going to go off and do these things, back to a consult or even a tell. And I think I may have lost my video, but I'll keep going. And so what it was is that he, for all intents and purposes, whoops. Can you guys still hear me?
Uh-huh.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think my camera went dead, and if it happened again, I apologize. But what had happened was by snapping it from an entrust back to a consult, he effectively said, I don't trust you. This process was going to be co-creative, but if I don't like the decision you make.
No, we can't hear you.
Yeah,
Brian, there you are.
How about now?
There you go. Yeah.
Have you got me?
Yes. I hear you.
Okay, so Lee, in a nutshell, let me answer the question. So in that moment, what I was trying to do is to show this model as a way of saying, look, what we're doing is going to erode trust. And it's not just me telling you that, here's why.
Yeah, that's good. Also, this is a new just Zoom cool thing for me. Apparently, if you're in Spotlight here on the phone, it puts you, oh, that's so interesting. All right.
It does what?
It put Brian vertical in a horizontal to make him fit. That was good fun. I hadn't seen it do that before. All right.
So that answers your question?
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay. No worries. What other questions do you have, or what else can I show you? Has anybody ever?
Rachel, tell us about the discount code.
Go ahead.
What did you say?
I messed that up.
Oh, Dana dropped in
Tell us about the discount code.
Dana dropped in the chat a discount code, which I then was going to go buy it and ran into a problem. So we did like troubleshooting in the chat. So if you want to buy it 50% off, there is a code in the chat where you can buy the meeting in a box and get it shipped to your abode.
The word off matters. Funny. Has anybody ever used a Visual Explorer or Visual Explorer-like activity? Yes. April, yes. And Lee, yeah. I mean, it's so powerful. Do you have any experiences of talking about how powerful it is? Go, April.
I've used it lots of times because I love them, but I think one of the most wonderful ones was when I was working with a group of young people who were aging out of foster care. So they're a very vulnerable group. In British Columbia, at the age of 19, they suddenly lose all their supports, and and they're people who have been through the whole foster care system, so they're pretty vulnerable people. And a lot of them were sort of had a trouble talking and expressing themselves and everything. So I started the session by pulling out, by putting Visual Explorer cards all around. And I said, the question for these cards is, where do you find your strength? And I said, pick a card or two or three. And, that's most answers that question. And if you feel like it, share with the room. You don't have to.
Oh.
Most of them did, only one person didn't. And it was so moving. And that that picking those images allowed them to find their voice and to start off the day that way was really powerful. I loved it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always blown away. For anybody else who's used Visual Explorer, Lee, you said you had as well. It's just amazing how, I mean, every single time, no matter at what point in the meeting you use it, what question you ask, I'm always blown away by the power of a photo to conjure up this story or this image or this feeling. It's just amazing.
Yeah.
Really, really
cool. Though that I think that I'm looking at my Visual Explorer kit and some of those images feel a bit outdated, and I feel like, oh God, they need to be updated.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that was my feeling at the time, actually. I thought, I just feel like there can be better images, and, not to brag, but I just thought that some of the images I had were like this one. I mean, it's just adorable, right? This is a little teepee with a little girl sitting in that teepee. That little girl is 27 years old now and lives in Tacoma and just bought her first house. So, I mean, it's just like the images are really powerful. And this, like, seriously, try and find one of these.
No.
So I noticed that I do have a preponderance for sunsets, though. So there tend to be, some interesting sunsets. I couldn't help it. But yeah, just some really cool and unique images. And what's particularly powerful for me as the quote unquote artist, and I know Avril, you are a photographer, so you get this, like what people can do and say with images that you took is pretty amazing. Yeah, just really amazing. So I'm always really humbled, honestly, when people come up with these really powerful stories for an image that I, snapped in a second and just happened to put on a card. It's just really, really powerful. I mean, if I were going to update this deck, somebody asked about updating the models. There haven't been any models that have really struck me that I need to add to the deck. If you happen to get this deck and look through it and say you're really missing this, please let me know. I'd love to know what models I should add to it, because I mean, I'm just like, I'd love to improve it. But honestly, I would love to make another deck of cards. I just think that the images, like you said, they can get stale. And frankly, I just have like, I think 20,000 photos on my phone camera. So probably if I could use some of those, it'd be awesome. Right now, I just pick the best of the year and make them into cards for my mother's friends. So other questions? Ways to use the kit? I remember when I created this, one of the big topics of discussion with my colleagues was this flash drive, actually. And so people said, well, you don't want to put everything on there because people are going to distribute it. And, there's going to be no security to it. Why would they ever, they're just going to buy one kit and everybody's going to share it. And I said, gosh, I looked into like, how could you make it secure and create a secure website? And after a while, I'm just like, this is way too much energy. Just like, more is better. Like, generosity is a good thing and people will do the right thing. And honestly, if you share it with somebody, it only creates better meetings. So since that was the goal of it, it wasn't to make, millions and millions of dollars. I'm not going to end up on the New York Times bestseller list for a meeting in a box kit.
So I love that. I love that abundance mindset, Dana. And, just thank you so much for your time and coming to talk to us. Anybody else? Comments, questions, anything you've got for Dana?
It's a great gift for clients, honestly.
Yeah.
If you just start leaving them, in fact, I had a conversation that year with a consultant friend of mine about how could we just start like stealthily leaving these in meeting rooms so that people would start to have better meetings on their own. But it didn't work out. But I just think it would be such a great gift to the world to start having better meetings. They really don't have to be terrible. And even if you do like what you did, Brian, in terms of, just pulling out something and drawing it in the moment and sharing it, I think is a really, really useful thing to show that there's stuff out there. I don't know about you, but I'm always scrambling to look for something that I know about or have, but I just don't have it in my head. So, probably if I were to add to this kit, I would add, this is what I've been doing this week actually, is little cards that have icebreakers on them, just index size cards. So I put them on a keychain sort of thing, because I'm always shocked at how I cannot remember icebreakers. And I have 25 plus years of icebreakers in my head that the file cabinet is not opening.
I like your idea about just sort of sprinkling these boxes around. Like that your next book is guerrilla facilitation. Lee, you got a question?
I love guerrilla facilitation. I don't know what that is, but there's a project in there for somebody. You just sell it on its own, right? It's not. I guess my question is, have you thought about an upsell where like you buy the thing and then you get a couple hours of Dana walking you through this thing? That seemed, I don't know, curious.
Yeah, no, interesting idea. I'd be grateful with your gorilla.
That's a great idea.
That is a really great idea.
Tutorial.
Yeah, no, yeah, with a good tutorial. Yeah, well, what I really should do if I were more tech savvy, maybe Brian can help me, is some YouTube videos, just like YouTube walkthrough videos to help people understand how to use it and the power of it. So maybe I'll put that on my list of things to do. I mean, after all, I recorded an audiobook, so I certainly can do YouTube videos, right?
Well, you've got this, and we'll get the recording out as quickly as possible.
Great. Well, thank you. That discount code is going to be good for all of December. So if you have any clients that you think would like one or would want to get one, I'm happy to extend the discount to them. So as long as they have that Nova 50 off, that will work for the rest of the month of December. And if you have any questions, certainly please reach out to me. Now I'm thinking maybe I do that icebreaker thing.
Sarah has a question. Sarah,
Yes, Sarah.
do you want to come off mute and
Yes, sorry, I'm driving, so I have not been able to show my face. I apologize for that. So I'm a relatively new graphic recorder, and I'm totally going to buy this meeting in a box because I feel like, as sort of new to the industry, it's good for me to have these models explained like really quickly for me, because I also think like when I walk into a meeting, I'll more quickly like understand what, you know, what's happening. I kind of use them as like study cards in a way.
Yes.
And I'm thinking that's probably, you know, one way I could use it. So if, from your experience and knowing what I do, how might how could I use this in maybe a different way, or how else could I use this as a graphic recorder?
Yeah, and I'll have other people jump in too, because I'm sure I'm not the wisest person in the room, but I think that's a great idea. You kind of use it as a study deck. I'm trying to find my deck that I carry with me. So I put a hole in the upper corner, and I put like one of those keychain things on it. And so this way I keep them all together, but I can flip through them easily. So this is, I mean, I often have index cards, kind of oversized index cards with me that I'll put either my notes, or like I said, I was creating this deck of icebreakers this week, but it's so great just to have a resource near you that you can quickly refer to. Brian said he was doing it himself, of models or templates. If you're new to graphic recording, having a couple of templates in your back pocket. I'm not going to tell you these templates are beautifully designed from a graphic recording standpoint. You know, they're not very colorful, but the layout is very practical. And so you can use those, you know, creating a RACI is really just a grid. And so having that, just to know that that's a really useful template for a group when they're trying to figure out who's going to do what, or an action planning template to help them with who's going to do what.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
does anybody else have any other questions? All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I think Brian got cold, maybe. Who knows what happened, but I'll close for him. Yeah, so thank you, Dana, for coming. We really appreciate it. And it's really always exciting to hear just the things out there people are creating and all of that.